Well, everyone, the Saudis have bought Electronic Arts. Today, it's going to be quite a story, and I'm going to kick it off with a quote for you. Here it is. There will be no immediate changes to your job, team, or daily work. So that's what Andrew Wilson, of course, the big CEO of EA, told employees after this deal was announced. And it's a deal for $55 billion, or at least that's the value of the deal. We'll get into the specifics later because, well, they're very relevant. There's a lot of debt. But as much as Mr. Wilson's letter is trying to set people at ease, all that staff can focus on is the word immediate. Because, yeah, sure, there may not be immediate changes. There certainly will be long-term ones. And here's why this matters. The games industry is being redefined right now, and here we see one of the largest publishers facing even more risk. And by risk, I mean all the greatest hits, layoffs, studio sell-offs, and all the regular things that come with terrible private equity owners doing the things that they do. But there's actually something bigger here. We've reached a point where whole governments think buying games companies is actually worth doing. That does mean at least that games kind of do matter on the global stage. So maybe we have got the recognition we always wanted, just not in the way that we wanted. Let's talk acquisition then. So EA is being sold to private investors for $55 billion. That means that it's leaving the public stock market and going into private hands. Now, in theory, this needs approval from Electronic Arts, shareholders, and regulators. Now, of course, the reality here is the former, the shareholders, are getting an extra 25% on the value of their shares. So basically, this is a good deal. They'll be fine. As for the latter, the regulators, well, they're not going to step in because who one of the buyers in this deal happens to be. We'll get to that shortly. Now, the deal should complete in early 2027, with likely no impacts until late 2026 at the earliest. For our coverage, this does change things, though. As an example, EA's earning reports will no longer be public. That means we won't be able to scrutinize them, not unless, of course, there are leaks. Now, in the past, we've flagged that sports games caused EA's Christmas problems, not Dragon Age. That is quite simply because the scale at which their sports games operates is so vast that even the underperformance of Dragon Age just wouldn't really matter at all. It's nothing compared to the football games having a little bit of a downturn. We've caught them trying to sell some lovely AI game development tools to their investors, and we'll come back to those shortly. But continuing with the deal, at least at the executive level, it seems that CEO Andrew Wilson will be keeping his job. Of course, with vested stock, he will likely pull the Pete Parsons parachute in just a few years. If you don't know what I mean by a Pete Parsons parachute, well, that's kind of what the Bungie CEO did whenever he stepped down. Anyway, one of the buyers called him, quote, an extraordinary CEO who doubled revenue, nearly tripled EBITDA, and driven a five-fold increase in market cap during his tenure. And the thing is, that stuff's actually true. Even in spite of all of the things that would make you or I be a bit grumpy about EA, well, those financial results are ultimately the thing that in this context matters. Now, all of this is following years of speculation. You see, EA actually wanted a sale. Even Disney got floated as a buyer of the company, and we even suggested this might be the plan whenever EA restructured and split sports and entertainment into separate companies. But, you know, when it goes down like this, being right doesn't exactly feel good. So, why do this now? Well, partially, the company has struggled to find new revenue. Spending in games is somewhat flatlined, and EA couldn't maintain momentum from releasing the best-selling sports game ever last year. Basically, college football did really good, but it's been a tough act to follow. Okay, so, got a bit of background. Now you might be wondering, okay, they've sold. To who? Who has got the money and the interest to buy one of gaming's biggest publishers? The answer is not who, it's actually whom. That being said, corporations aren't actually people, so what it is three companies. Three companies are buying EA, but in effect, it's two governments. The most simple part of this is Silver Lake. They're just a traditional private equity firm. So yeah, you can say the vultures are there. Of course they're there. They're always there. And they're the ones who gave that lovely quote about Andrew Wilson's success with EA and have allegedly wanted to make an offer since 2011. Now they're going to be the, quote, large minority shareholder. That means under 50% ownership. But then we've got the more important groups, the people who have spearheaded this deal. According to the Financial Times' reporting, it is Jared Kushner's Affinity Partners. That, of course, is the same Jared Kushner who's the son-in-law of the current US president and former advisor to him. And he may be why this deal is unlikely to face regulatory scrutiny. His private equity firm will hold about 5% of the new Electronic Arts US. And this continues a pattern of US government-backed business leaders consolidating ownership of media with seemingly some of the old state approval, which is rather relevant because there are two states involved in this deal. The Saudi Public Investment Fund actually already held a 9.87% investment in EA. That actually made them the company's second largest investor. So now what we're seeing is them increase their stake to become the single largest owner. And they've actually by now invested in most of the games industry, and you might remember that. As an example, it was them who backed out of a deal with the Embracer Group, which then caused the collapse of that company and the selling off of loads of assets, closure of studios, and all those things we've covered in the channel. More recently, they've been in the news as the new majority owners of SNK, and that means they're behind the disastrous new Fatal Fury revival featuring the face of Saudi Arabian football, Cristiano Ronaldo. Sorry, that sentence, again, yes, Fatal Fury, Cristiano Ronaldo. Smash together. Profit. Of course, this came after SNK promised that the ownership, quote, doesn't affect us in any way. Okay, I mean, a problem with written word is we can't exactly see them blinking SOS at us through the words, can we? Now, this purchase, along with acquiring 50% of the EVO fighting game tournament, yep, FGC, you guys have been got as well, well, that consolidates their esports leagues into ES Faceit. And, well, they've done some fun things like hosting the laughably bad Esports World Cup. So yes, all of this does raise worries, though they shouldn't be surprising, because this is just the Saudi private investment fund using the games industry for something that we call sports washing. And sports washing is a very simple practice, it's really a tale as old as time, where a country uses cultural events like sports to basically launder its reputation. Let's not think about all of the effective slave workers who may have died in the process. You know, thinking about mega projects and stadiums and all sorts of lovely bad things that get swept under the rug so that we can look at the Esports World Cup and be extremely excited. Which is just what they want. Of course, this is a reputation they will want to launder because, well, there's the alleged murder of hostile press, things like a bit of ethnic cleansing of populations to clear spaces for new cities, or, you know, just the good old-fashioned human rights violations regarding things like freedom of speech, women's rights, LGBT issues, and many, many other things. And, of course, now, they directly have a stake in Electronic Arts, while their ally in the US government has an indirect lever to pull. So putting all that together, yeah, no wonder staff are worried. But maybe they shouldn't be worried. Per CEO Andrew Wilson, this deal will, quote, enable the company to move faster and unlock new opportunities on a global stage. Very exciting stuff. Obviously, though, I don't really think staff are buying too much of it. He did tell them that there will be no, quote, immediate changes to your job, team, or daily work. He says, quote, the company's mission, values, and commitment to players and fans will remain unchanged. Obviously, though, people are skeptical of that word, immediate. Staff have spoken off the record to several outlets. They're talking about fears of the Saudi Public Investment Fund's influence in projects and minority staff. They're expecting layoffs. They're, of course, expecting increased AI usage and even the sales of some studios. The one thing a lot of people have floated is basically BioWare. Why the hell would they give a shit about BioWare when the thing that drives all the financial results is the football and the guns? And that means these fears are especially prominent on the EA Entertainment side of that company. This is where we go to Insider Gaming, who have reported something kind of interesting, that at one point in the past, EA did consider selling BioWare. Which, I mean, is hardly a surprise. Of course they would have considered that. And for reasons we'll get to shortly, there is an expectation that the company might sell off many studios and IPs that don't make money. Because here's the thing, the new owners did not necessarily buy EA for EA Entertainment. You see, Silver Lake and the Saudi Public Investment Fund are already investors in many sports-adjacent companies. That's not just football, it's also likes the UFC. Now, the expectation is that they will leverage these connections to give EA Sports even more opportunities. And that obviously pairs well with all the esports companies and events that are owned by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. This stuff will basically help their sports ambitions, or should I say, sports washing ambitions. And those ambitions may go beyond what we've seen today, because according to sources, they actually have plans to invest even more money in EA to make new acquisitions and just new deals. So essentially, they bought it for the sports, but they also think they can get far more profit out of EA. You know, cut the fact, enough of all that stupid creative shit, more football. Kinda. But of course, there's always room for this to go worse, and I've got to go back to our, of course, main man, Andrew Wilson. Running up to all of these, he was doing meetings, right? And they had a lot of showcasing of the potential of AI game development. And it seems that those things worked. And here's a quote for that. The new owners are betting artificial intelligence will fuel an entertainment boom and yield major corporate cost savings by reducing production expenses for games. So these groups think they can make more games, make games faster, and make them with fewer resources. And EA is essentially their chance to prove that. Basically, EA is a bet for them. Now, whether they'll actually be able to do that is a different story. In many ways, Andrew Wilson's job is, shareholder returns. And that means that in many ways he will be a corporate storyteller. It's his job to weave a narrative and sell it to investors. He may not even 100% believe in what he's saying. And I don't bring this up to try and tar and feather him. No. It's simply to say, or to highlight, the incentives that are involved here. Because this is a shitload of money. And if his job is to do well by shareholders, goddamn, those shareholders just picked up a 25% premium on their holdings. That's pretty good. But the downside is that within a few years, EA could kind of be killed, regardless of their goals. You see all that stuff about incentives? That's like long-term spooky stuff that sort of explains why we get into the positions we're in. But this is the short-term spooky stuff. So, the three partners are only paying $35 billion for EA. The remaining $20 billion is why this is called a leveraged buyout. We love leveraged buyouts over here. So, that money is coming from loans from JP Morgan Chase. So upon completion of the transaction, the loans will transfer to EA from their new parent companies. And what that will do is it will saddle EA with $20 billion in debt that it will need to pay off. Now, this debt has been rated as junk. And for a quick explainer of what that means, there are rating agencies, and one of their jobs is basically to say, what is the level of risk with debt held by this entity? And if the risk is really low, then they'll give it a really good rating, and the interest rate on that debt will be low. But if it's below a certain threshold, it's what we refer to as junk debt, which basically means the interest on that debt will be really, really high. Of course, if EA does really well, then great, that debt will be paid off, and that interest will, well, it will make JP Morgan Chase a shitload of money. So happy days for them. But obviously, it is $20 billion of high interest rate debt. Now, the way this works is that in an ideal world, the company will pay down the debt, it will become more profitable and worth more, and then the private investors will sell the company off or perhaps take the company public. Now, if they don't pay it off, then they default on the loans in exactly the same way as Toys R Us or Party City did in the US. The investors walk away and goodbye EA. Until either outcome, EA will be left with debt payments that will require staggering payouts every year. And to give you some context, in their last quarterly update, of course, quarterly update is the sort of thing they'll no longer have to make, EA predicted they would make an estimated profit of $795 million to $974 million this year. Fantastic news! But that would mean EA would effectively have to turn all of their profit into repayments. And then some, because if your profit is near enough $1 billion a year, but, this new debt is $20 billion, yeah, take a while to pay that off, couldn't it? So what do you think's going to happen? Are they going to run as is? No, they're not. They're going to have to cut their costs to increase their profits, or they will need to increase their profits by finding new revenue streams. That could mean more licensing deals for projects, like say Amazon's Mass Effect television show. Analysts suggested to Kotaku that this might mean EA will redouble their failed efforts on mobile games. But it is nearly guaranteed that EA will be continuing on their present path. They've already been making themselves appealing by cutting more than 1,000 jobs in the last 2 years. Now, what's EA's single largest expense on their balance sheet? Well, 34% of their revenue goes on R&D for in-development games. It's the biggest cut, and it's the biggest risk. Community goodwill projects like rebuilding and re-releasing Command & Conquer source code are not likely to continue. New games are going to be very expensive, which is why, as an example, BioWare staff feel particularly threatened. Mass Effect's new game is years away, and maybe the television show's existence will save it, but many expect EA will have to sell off their riskier studios and IP, the non-sports ones that is, to meet the repayments of these loans. It's all quite brutal. Now, some see this as a silver lining, that effectively Electronic Arts' hoard of IP might end up going to people who will actually use it, or that maybe the whole entertainment division could even be sold. But looking back at the last decade of gaming, when has more consolidation actually solved anything? Like, really solved anything? And that's to say nothing of the fact that at the prices EA will need to sell, only the biggest players out there can afford it. So imagine Tencent buying EA Entertainment, or Xbox, or PlayStation. That may save some of those studios in the short term, but overall for the industry, I don't think it would necessarily be a win. There's just one thing I would say that's in EA's favor right now, and it's that the whole deal kind of doesn't make any sense. That may seem like a big claim, but hold on with me for a second. This was flagged by this analyst whose name I'm actually not going to mangle today, and he points out that this deal is simply bad business. So, the buyers are spending 20% over the value of EA, and that is something that the financials can't really support, and that's why this loan is framed as being junk. The existing revenue streams at EA are stable, that's good, but anything new will be a risk. Cutting staff and reforming EA as a leaner, more efficient company would make sense if the plan was to flip it for cash. But the largest shareholder, the Saudis, aren't actually that type of investor. They're not just interested in the money. Obviously, they have other sources of money, and one of the reasons why they are piling all of that money into things like this, well, on the one hand, it's to generate goodwill for Saudi Arabia. It's also to try and diversify their economy so they won't be as fragile in the future. So that's one of the reasons why they'll want EA. And that is not necessarily aligned with, the best overall financial results at the end of the day, because for them, not all of the value is strictly short-term financial. But that does at least create a few interesting incentives. I mean, if they begin by cutting and firing people, if they demand changes to existing games, that won't be good press. Even if audiences don't like EA, we do know that some fans are protective. Fans of The Sims, fans of Mass Effect, they are viciously protective of those games. So we're now left in a very strange position. As noted by our analysts from earlier, they currently control one of the most profitable mobile games of all time, simply because they spent far too much money in Scopely and then kept spending to fund the dominance of Monopoly Go to make it the biggest game in the world. So yeah, they just love their monopoly apparently. But basically, it's not just financial dominance that they want here. It is cultural dominance. And now we just have to wait and see how they plan to achieve that with Electronic Arts, and just how much of that company they will even need to accomplish their goals, and therefore, well, what will happen to the bits that they don't need. Right now, I don't know, but taking a look at the last decade of games industry history, I'm not feeling particularly bright about it. And, well, for a little touch of why things are not exactly bright at all levels of the industry, check this out about Dreamhaven. It's the company from Mike Morhaime, Blizzard co-founder, and they've not exactly had a great time lately.